Welcome to folks joining via the recordings. I'll just share my screen so you can look at something interesting rather than a black screen. So we're talking about the introduction of a new class called relationship to have relationships between entities in as simple a way as possible, such that we can say that someone is the student of someone else, or married to someone else, or the court jester of a particular royal, or whatever else needs to be said. So yeah, the idea then is to have a new class, which we would have to create a term for, say, relationship. It would have P2 classified as, just relate what relationship this is, what sort of relationship it is. It would be directional, so it's from someone and it's to someone else, or from something to something. So that someone is the student of someone else rather than just being a student, a non-directional student relationship, which doesn't make any sense. This would mean that we wouldn't need sort of generic relationships like DC relation. We could just have a relationship without a classified as, or it's just a very generic classification. That would then make it a little bit more consistent. And if you wanted to find sort of not very well specified or vocabulary level relationships, you would just look for relationship instances rather than also having to look for DC relation. So what do we think? Ethan, you asked if there was a list of relationship types, which I don't think there is, but as in we don't have an official one. We haven't agreed on anything yet, but there is one for AAT. Sorry, for all of the Getty vocabs, and Antoine brings up the relators from Mark as being potentially useful. And then Ethan, you and Antoine discussed some stuff which I think resolved, right? Or is there still an open question?
I think it's resolved.
Can I ask a question for clarification?
Mm-hmm.
So you're proposing that there would be a relationship class for the relation of anything to anything, or between people?
Anything to anything, I think, would be the, at least to begin with. If we don't, I guess, well, that's a good question. My thought was we should do anything to anything, because it seems like there will be relationships between objects that we don't know exactly what they are. And that could be, and having two different patterns for the same thing would be silly. However, if we don't have any actual use cases for person to object, or object to object, or place to place, or similar, then we should only do people.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like down this way lies dragons.
Yeah.
Like because the substance of the relation is different, and if we just have a general related to it, I don't know. It feels like you would be able to evade semantics, in fact, because you can just put anything. It would be something that has to be cleaned in the future because people would use it for anything.
Yeah,
it would be a class of use, I would argue.
yes.
But a relation, like something strictly about. I mean, in CRM as such right now, the closest thing you have about that, or like that for objects, is shows features of. So there you're saying like, well, there's some sort of, identity, some sort of similarity between these things, and that's why you'd want to match them. But that is very different semantics than you know, godfather, godson, or what have you, which need not show any features of anything. So I don't know. I feel it would proceed very quickly if you just wanted to have a general relation class, but like it is clear that CRM doesn't have anything for describing in a robust way social or familial relationships.
Yep. Yeah. So
I would argue. Yeah. And I missed last time, so if I'm repeating things that happened, then sorry.
No. So yeah, I agree. I think that's sort of the point of the class, that it's an escape valve where we have a place to put things that we do know we need to come back and work on later. But if those things are not blocking people from doing what they need to do, then yeah, we should not introduce inconsistency, if at all possible. So what I put on the screen is the relationships for AAT, TGN, and ULAN. So many of these do map already into CRM quite nicely. Let's pick one. So yeah, but clearly material produced by an activity, well, that's obvious. Or something as the focus of a particular field, that seems easy to manage as well. But when we go down to people, where's people or places? TGN 3510, historical connection. Guyenne, France has a historical connection to Gascogne, France, which is not particularly useful.
Yeah, semantically very underdefined.
Exactly. Possibly identified with, or yeah. So having that would, if you wanted to say that there was a relationship between Guyenne and Gascogne, and my apologies if as I am likely butchering the pronunciation, then at the moment we wouldn't have any way to even create any link between the two E53 places.
That's true, but in fact, we can't make the link because we don't know what they mean.
Exactly. So yeah, whether that's useful or not, I think is going to be the question. And yeah, clearly related to is equally inane.
What instigated the issue?
This matrix of
this guy. Okay.
This thing, yeah. And particularly for people, because yeah, appointed by, crowned by, colleague of, collaborated with, performs with, advisor of, partner in, blah 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 blah. All of the people ones do seem quite specific.
Mm-hmm.
Founder of, patron of, teacher of, leader of, student at. Student. I know that would be just group, not place. So those ones, the people, I think, are pretty good. The places and concepts less useful. So I don't know, what do other people think? Should we limit it to people, and then if we come up with something that really means that we can't, we need something like this or something else, then expand it? Or should we go the other way and make it open but only use it for people and until we and only use it for people?
Generally not a big fan of expanding the model faster than data or use cases actually are driving.
I think we should stick to people and organizations.
Yeah. Yes.
Are we treating these relationships as instances then?
Yep, let me go back to the issue. So yeah, the relationship becomes an instance of type relationship with two properties from and to, or domain and range, or similar, and a P2 for what sort of relationship. And yeah, unless anyone disagrees, I think we should say that's only between actor to actor.
Yeah, I agree.
We can do actor to actor. I can tell you, I know there's interest on our end for quickly rolling to TGN, which will have place to actor and actor to place relationships.
Yeah, I mean, looking at that matrix, there wasn't any that seemed, there was only a very few TGN ones, and most of them were not, either not semantic at all.
I'm sorry, my headphones cut out for a second. Could you repeat that?
In the matrix that we were just looking at, there weren't many TGN links, and the ones that were there seemed to either be not very semantic at all, like has historical connection, or to be things that we can already say about place to place in CRM, or building that happens to be at a place to place. But yes, if we come to something that we want to be able to say and can't, then yeah, we should certainly revise the opinion. So to be reassessed when we have non-actor based use cases from data, right? That's our modus operandi.
Yeah, I agree.
So if then, on the present proposition, so there's this relation class, and so in the case where, and normally I would think a relationship would be represented by a relationship, but if we reify it as a class all the time, then in the case of having this lack of knowledge where all I have expressed is Bob related to Sally, and I don't know if it's in this form or that form or the other form, then you just instantiate it as from Bob to Sally via relationship, and don't put a type on it.
Yep, that's what I would do. And if you have a string, then maybe you have a label and or a name for it. And if at some point it becomes more well classified, then you could add the classification. That's what I've been thinking, at least. As a sort of forward improvement pattern of, as you know more, you add more data rather than having to go back and change things.
Yeah. Well, and on the point of the, David's points, I don't think there's any reason in principle to limit it to actor. It just seems like the only case it's really solid, we know what we're talking about. So
yeah.
If we can isolate the rest, then it should have another sibling class or something. But social relation seems relatively clear as something that you'd want to talk about, and that is recognizable by our society.
Yeah. That's
You know, I'll chime in here. This is Jonathan. Just to say that from an exhibition point of view, we've been muddling through a lot of different types of entity-to-entity relationships and just person-to-exhibition relationships in specific. So it's pretty much the same question. And I think this approach is going to help solve that issue. But even there, we have classes of participants, and then sometimes it's a class, you know, participant in the exhibition, but then subclasses of exhibitors or people in the exhibition somehow, and organizers in that class. So we're still thinking through how complex that representation needs to be. But certainly I think this is the right approach that could cover that.
So sort of the role of the person relative to the exhibition, the activity of the exhibition, or?
Yeah, the role, and certainly there's lots of controlled vocabulary terms, you know, for this in AAT, but some of it is just the historical different ways people referred to organizers, you know, either as curator, director, planner, installer, designer, credits that were, you know, pretty forward and public and acknowledged. And just being able to contain all that variety or preserve that complexity to some extent, even if, you know, we know that they're all just the people who made the exhibition rather than the people who are in the exhibition. And then, I mean, for Linked.art, we're coming from the object point of view. So we're not thinking or dealing or worrying about exhibitions where the object isn't really known, or exhibitions where it's just the artist himself, herself in the show. So there's this range of ways that artists can be a part of exhibitions that at some points need to be clarified.
Yep.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, right. I would add, this is Ethan, I would add that an exhibition is a sort of event, and eventually we will probably want to get to some sort of event-based model that stands apart from the object representation that we're currently focused on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I think, I mean, I'll have a lot of data and more thoughts on that when we get to it.
Yeah. Right, so.
This is Carly. I just wanted to chime in and sort of agree with what was just said. I think I'm particularly interested in Linked Art as how it can represent events. And I have a background in curatorial studies and studied exhibition history. And I think there are many cases where objects aren't known, but participants are. So finding ways to capture those relationships are really important in terms of research applications.
Right. Thank you. All right, so for the last 5 minutes, I'd like to set us thinking for next time about phases, because phases are one of these extensions that we've run into in the Linked Art work that solve a lot of problems, but at the same time introduce a few different problems. So if we can discuss it next time, I think we'll then be in a good position to move on to provenance as the core topic once we get to the face-to-face. So for phase, the idea is that there are sort of periods of time that are specific to a particular entity. And the easy one from a provenance perspective to think about is ownership. So if you have only the acquisition event, so some person acquired the ownership of this particular object, then that initiates a phase of ownership. So the period between this acquisition and acquisition in which the new owner gives or sells or otherwise loses the ownership. The reason why this is important, rather than just having the two acquisitions, is that we don't know, given just the two acquisitions, that there weren't 16 other acquisitions that happened between them. And this is in fact only two very small parts of the of the ownership, rather than being able to assert that this actor owned this object throughout this period of time. So that's when phase comes in, essentially, to assert that there is a period of time during which this particular relationship holds true. It can then interact with the events. So the phases can then be initiated by things. So the ownership is initiated by the purchase and is terminated by the sale. They're related to people or objects or entities. It's the phase of a thing, so it's the ownership phase of the object. And they have a relationship, which is the relationship. In this case, P52 has current owner. So it's sort of, this is why I for the relationships wanted to rule out the temporal and spatial, because instead, if we wanted to say that there was a relationship which held for a certain amount of time, we could just use this pattern to say that there was a phase of being the student of, as opposed to smashing phases and relationships together into one pattern. So that is the sort of the provenance idea for phases. Another reason why this is useful is that phase is a temporal entity in the model, and hence can be partitioned. So you can say that during the ownership of this object, this other activity occurred, which otherwise, if you don't know when particularly it occurred, other than just when it was owned by a particular actor, it's very hard to link that activity into the broader picture of ownership, or the life history of the object, essentially. So we could then say that during the ownership phase of the painting by an art dealer, there was an activity that took place, which was inventory taking, which happened at a certain point in time, and thus we know here is the evidence that they continued to own this object because it's mentioned in this inventory taking in a stock book or a event log or something like that. You could even go so far to say that there is the entire lifetime of an object as a phase, which was initiated by the production and terminated by the destruction. Whether we want to ever go that far, who knows, but that's sort of the ultimate phase. Some other use cases for phase were things like the use of a particular object or building or whatever for a certain role. So the building started off being a church, and then it was abandoned, and then it was a restaurant. It's still the same building. The building didn't change. It was just that it had different phases of its existence in which it was used for different purposes. Nationality and gender would be other potentials for phase for people. So my son was born an American, and then when he was about 3 months old, he gained his New Zealand citizenship because he gets it from me, but you have to apply for it. So he has an American phase, and then now he has an American and New Zealand and British phase. He gets British from his mother. If I were to apply for American citizenship, I would then have a much shorter American citizenship phase. If you change gender, you would have a male phase and a female phase, or vice versa, or whatever. So this then is something that we think is going to be useful. it doesn't fit in as neatly with the point-based events that CRM is used to, but it can interact with them via initiated and terminated. So we don't have time for discussion of it, but if you can think about these sorts of things and think about use cases or how this could be useful, or conversely, if what problems this might introduce for next time, would be super valuable, so that we can discuss it and try to come to some at least initial conclusions about it. And with that, I'm afraid that it is the top of the hour, and we need to say au revoir. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to folks for helping with taking the notes. And we'll have another meeting, another discussion in a couple of weeks' time. All right.
Thanks, Rob.
Cheers, Rob.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.